Jake Harris slammed his glass down so hard the whole bar went quiet, then pointed straight across the room and laughed. "Look at this old ghost. Somebody forgot to tell him the war's over." Every head turned. And the man sitting alone in the corner, the one with the calloused hands, the tired eyes, and a coffee he hadn't touched, just looked up. Slow, steady. Like a man who had already survived things Jake Harris couldn't spell. What happened next in that bar didn't just shut Jake up. It changed him. This is the story of Daniel Mercer, the man they called the Black Wolf, and why that name will never mean the same thing again. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You do not want to miss where this goes. The bar was called Rowdy's Tap, and on most Friday nights, it lived up to its name. It sat on the edge of Clarksville, Tennessee, not far from Fort Campbell, and the clientele was exactly what you'd expect. Big men, loud voices, and the particular brand of restless energy that never quite leaves a person after they've worn a uniform. The jukebox in the back played country music nobody was really listening to. The TVs above the bar showed a college football game nobody was really watching. The real entertainment on most nights was the room itself, the stories, the bravado, the unspoken competitions that men who had once been warriors never entirely gave up. Daniel Mercer walked in at 8:47 p.m. He didn't make an entrance. That was the thing about Daniel he never did. He moved through the door the way water moves around a stone. Quiet, efficient, causing no disruption. He was 46 years old, 6 feet even with a build that wasn't built for show, but for function. Wide shoulders that carried the weight of years without broadcasting it, hands that looked like they'd been carved out of something harder than skin. His hair was cut close and going gray at the temples, and there were lines on his face that didn't come from laughing. Chumche. He found the corner table, the one with its back to the wall, and a clear line of sight to every exit without thinking about it. Old habits. He sat down, ordered a black coffee from a waitress named Becca, who recognized him and didn't push for conversation, and he settled in. This was his one night a month. One Friday night when his daughter Sophie, 12 years old, and already too smart for her own good, stayed at her Aunt Carol's house in Nashville. One night when Daniel Mercer was not a father, not a neighbor, not the quiet guy who coached Little League in the fall. One night when he was just a man with nowhere to be. He hadn't touched the coffee yet when he first noticed Jake Harris. Jake was hard to miss. He was maybe 32-33, the kind of man who still worked out like he had something to prove, which he did. He had the build of someone who had spent serious time in a serious program, the kind of fitness that isn't just vanity, but identity. He was at the center of a group of 5 or 6 men, all younger, all clearly former military, all orbiting Jake. The way people orbit a fire drawn to the heat, careful not to get too close. Jake was telling a story. He was always telling a story. Daniel caught fragments of it across the room. Something about a training rotation in Coronado. Something about how the new class of candidates were soft, a word Jake said with the particular contempt of someone who believes softness is a moral failing. His audience laughed on cue. One of them slapped the table. Daniel looked back at his coffee. He recognized the type. He had been a version of that type long ago, the man who fills the room, who needs the room, who measures his worth by how many people are listening. He didn't judge Jake for it. He just had no use for it anymore. Yeah. He checked his phone. Sophie had texted him a photo from Aunt Carol's, a selfie with Carol's golden retriever, both of them making the same ridiculous expression. Daniel looked at that photo for a long moment. Then he smiled a small private thing and put the phone face down on the table. He took his first sip of coffee. It was quiet in his corner. Good quiet. It lasted about 11 more minutes. "Hey, Becca." Jake Harris's voice cut across the bar with the easy confidence of a man who had never once doubted his right to be the loudest thing in any room. "Who's the ghost in the corner? He been here before." Becca, to her credit, didn't even look up from the glass she was wiping. He comes in sometimes. Mind your business, Jake. I'm just asking. And I'm just answering. Mind your business. There was a beat of laughter from Jake's table, not at him exactly, but the kind of laughter that inflates a man rather than deflating him. Jake pushed back his chair and stood up. He was carrying his beer loosely, the way men do when they want to look casual and threatening at the same time. He walked toward Daniel's corner. Daniel heard the footsteps. He didn't look up. Jake pulled out the chair across from him. Didn't ask, just pulled it out and dropped into it with the sprawling confidence of a man who believes every space belongs to him. You mind, he said. You're already sitting, Daniel said, not looking up from his coffee. Jake grinned. Observant. I like that. He glanced back at his friends, who were watching with the eager attention of people who know the show is starting. So what's your deal, man? You've been staring at that coffee for 20 minutes like it owes you money. I've been thinking, Daniel said. About what? Nothing that would interest you. Jake leaned back, studying him. There was calculation in it, the sizing up that men with something to prove can't help but do. He took in Daniel's age, his posture, the coffee instead of a beer, the absence of any loud story or loud companions. You military? Jake asked. Was. What branch? Daniel looked up for the first time. His eyes were a pale, clear gray, the kind of eyes that don't give you much, that have learned over decades to keep their own counsel. He looked at Jake for exactly 1 second. Then he looked back at his coffee. Navy, he said. Navy. Jake repeated it like he was tasting it, deciding something. What rate? SEAL. The word landed, and Jake went very still for just a moment, just a flicker, the way a card player goes still when the hand turns over wrong. Then he smiled again, wider this time, but with something different underneath it. No kidding, Jake said. When? Long time ago. I was a SEAL, Jake said. Team 3, Coronado. 3 deployments. Iraq, Afghanistan 1. I can't talk about. He let that hang, the classified deployment, the way men do when they want you to know the weight of what they've carried. You were what teams in the 90s? Some of the 90s, some of the 2000s. Huh. Jake tilted his head. He was doing math, the kind of math that men do when they're establishing hierarchy. So you were what Vietnam-era adjacent Cold War stuff must have been a different world. Daniel said nothing. I'm not being disrespectful, Jake said with the particular tone of someone who absolutely is. I'm just saying the program has evolved. What they're doing now, what my class went through, it makes the old days look like... Jake. One of the men from his table, a square-jawed kid named Reeves, who had the decency to look uncomfortable, had appeared at the edge of the conversation. Hey man, leave him alone. Come back. Walsh just got here. Jake waved him off without looking. I'm having a conversation, Reeves. Relax. He turned back to Daniel. What I'm saying is the standards are different now. Higher. I'm sure what you did was impressive for the time. Daniel lifted his coffee cup and drank. Jake watched him, waiting for a reaction. Not getting one seemed to irritate him more than any comeback could have. What's your name? Jake asked. Daniel. Daniel what? A pause. Mercer. Jake looked at him, then looked away like he was searching something in his memory, then looked back. You're not wait. Mercer, Daniel Mercer, out of SEAL Team 6, early 2000s. Daniel said nothing. Jake's expression shifted into something complicated, something between recognition and the need to not let that recognition give the other man any ground. I heard that name before. One of the old guys at Coronado mentioned it, said there was a Mercer who... He stopped, started again. You were in Kunar Province, 2004. I'm going to finish my coffee, Daniel said quietly, and I'm going to enjoy the rest of my evening. You're welcome to go back to your friends." "That's not an answer." "No," Daniel said. "It's not." Jake stared at him. The calculation was running hard behind his eyes now. He'd looked up enough to know that the name Mercer meant something, or it had, once, and that knowledge was doing something uncomfortable to the story he'd already built in his head about the quiet old man in the corner. He didn't like uncomfortable. He went back to his table. Daniel thought it was over. He should have known better. The second round of drinks hit Jake's table around 9:30, and with it came the loosening that alcohol brings to men who are already loose. The laughter got louder. The stories got bigger. And Daniel, watching from his corner without meaning to, could see the moment Jake decided he wasn't finished. He saw it in the way Jake's eyes kept cutting across the room, in the way he said something low to Reeves, and Reeves shook his head and Jake shrugged, dismissing him. In the way Jake stood up again slower this time, deliberate, and crossed the room with the rolling confidence of a man who had just talked himself back into something. He didn't sit down this time. He stood at the edge of Daniel's table, hands in his pockets, head tilted, performing casual. "I did some thinking," Jake said. "Good for you," Daniel said. A few people nearby had noticed. The couple at the next table went quiet. The bartender, a thick-armed man named Russell, who had worked Rowdy's for 12 years, looked up from the glass he was pouring. "I think you're running a con," Jake said loud enough now that it wasn't a private conversation anymore. "I think you sit in bars and drop the seal thing and wait for somebody to buy you drinks and tell you you're a hero. And I think the old guy routine is part of the act." Daniel looked up. Slowly. "You think that?" "I think men like you, men who were something maybe a long time ago, have a hard time letting go. So they hang around places where people might still care." He gestured at the bar. "This is a veterans bar, man. Everybody's got a story. You want credit for yours? Get in line." The room was quiet enough now that the jukebox felt intrusive. Russell reached over and turned it down 2 notches. "I don't want credit," Daniel said. "Then what do you want?" "I want to finish my coffee." "Right." Jake nodded slowly, playing to the audience now, which had grown without anyone quite moving. "Right. The coffee." He looked around, got the eye contact he was looking for. "You know what I think the real problem is? I think you know that the world moved on. I think you know that whatever you were, the program is better now, harder now, and the guys running it now, guys like me, would have eaten you alive." Daniel put down his cup. Very carefully. The way you put something down when you're deciding what to do with your hands. "I want you to hear me say something," Daniel said, and his voice was so quiet and so level that people leaned in without meaning to. "I'm not going to argue with you. I'm not going to compete with you. I am going to tell you one time, go back to your table." Jake smiled. He had what he wanted, the reaction, the attention, the escalation. He had the room, he thought. Or what, he said. "Old man's gonna show me something." And then Jake Harris, who should have stopped, who had been warned, who, if he'd been paying any real attention at all, should have noticed the quality of the stillness in Daniel Mercer's body. The particular kind of still that isn't paralysis, but its opposite. Jake Harris pulled out the pin on the grenade that had been sitting on that table all night. He laughed, turned to the room, and said it loud enough for everyone to hear. "The Black Wolf. Isn't that what they used to call you, the Black Wolf of Kunar, man? That's a sad story. The legendary Black Wolf alone in a bar on a Friday night drinking decaf and hoping somebody still cares." The silence that followed was a different kind than before. It was the silence of a room that knows it just witnessed something irreversible. Daniel Mercer stood up. He didn't push back his chair dramatically. He didn't slam anything. He just rose. And the way he rose, the slow, absolute gravitational certainty of it, made 3 men in his immediate vicinity unconsciously shift backward without knowing they'd done it. He was not a big man by the standards of the room. But standing something happened to the space around him that defied easy explanation. He seemed to take up more of it. The air felt different. Jake held his ground. His smile didn't waver, but something behind his eyes recalibrated. Daniel looked at him. Really looked at him the way you look at something you're deciding how to handle. Not with anger. Not with the hot reactive fury that Jake had been trying to provoke all night. With something worse. With assessment. "You want to know about the Black Wolf," Daniel said. His voice was still quiet, still level, but there was something underneath it now, a vibration low and continuous, like the hum of something enormous at rest. "You want to know what that name cost?" Jake opened his mouth. Daniel took one step toward him. Just one. Jake closed his mouth. "That name," Daniel said, "was given to me by men who are dead, not movie dead, not metaphor dead, dead. Men whose names are on a wall in Washington. Men whose kids grew up without fathers. Men who died in a valley in Kunar Province in October of 2004 because we ran into something we weren't fully prepared for, and someone had to hold a position while the rest of the team got out." He paused. Not for effect, just paused. The way you pause when you're crossing a threshold, you don't cross lightly. "I held it," he said, "for 6 hours, alone, and when they came back for me, when what was left of my team came back. The only thing Martinez said to me before he passed out from blood loss was, 'You held like a wolf man, like a black wolf in the dark.'" The jukebox, which Russell had turned down, suddenly felt like it had been turned off entirely. "Martinez died in Walter Reed 3 weeks later," Daniel said. "He was 28 years old. He had a wife and a son he'd never met in person, because the boy was born while we were deployed. His son's name is Daniel. He named him after me." He let that land. So when you say that name, when you throw it around like it's a punchline, you're not talking about me. He looked at Jake with those gray eyes, steady, clear, without hatred. "You're talking about Martinez," he said, "and about Kowalski, and about Reyes and Tran and Henderson. You're talking about 6 men who bled in the dark so that other men could live. You want to mock that? You go ahead. That's your business." He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his wallet, set a $20 bill on the table next to his barely touched coffee. "But do it," he said, "when I'm not in the room." He picked up his jacket. And Daniel Mercer walked toward the door, back straight shoulder square, the same way he'd walked into rooms in Kunar and Kandahar, and a dozen other places that would never appear on any map that Jake Harris had ever seen, and the crowd parted for him, the way crowds part for men who don't need them to. At the door he stopped. Didn't turn around. Just stopped. "The program isn't harder now," he said to the room, to no one, to everyone. "It's just different, and different isn't better." He pushed open the door. He walked out into the Tennessee night. And behind him in the bar called Rowdy's Tap, in the particular silence that follows when something true has been said in a loud room, Jake Harris stood exactly where Daniel Mercer had left him. His beer was in his hand. His friends were watching him. The audience that had been his was no longer. Reeves put a hand on his shoulder. Jake shrugged it off. But he didn't speak. He had nothing left to say. Outside, Daniel stood for a moment on the sidewalk. The night air was cool, and it smelled like cut grass and diesel and the specific nothing smell of an empty parking lot. He stood with his hands in his pockets and his face turned up just slightly, the way people do when they're steadying themselves. He pulled out his phone. Sophie had sent another text. "Rosie, that's the dog stole Carol's sock and won't give it back. I am witnessing chaos. How's your night?" Daniel read it twice. He typed back, "Uneventful. Give Rosie my regards. Love you." He put the phone in his pocket. He walked to his truck, a 12-year-old F-150 dark blue with a Little League parking sticker on the bumper, and he got in and he sat for a moment in the dark and the quiet. He didn't think about Jake Harris. He thought about Martinez. He thought about a valley in Kunar Province and a ridgeline and the long, cold, certain feeling of being the last thing standing between the dark and the men who needed to get home. He thought about what that felt like, not the heroism of it, because it hadn't felt like heroism, not in the moment, not in any moment since. It had felt like necessity, like the only possible thing to do. He thought about Martinez's son, about a boy named Daniel, somewhere in New Mexico, growing up with a father's name and a father's absence, and hopefully, some sense of why it mattered. He turned the key in the ignition. The F-150 came to life with its familiar, slightly too loud, idle something with the exhaust he kept meaning to get looked at, and Daniel Mercer pulled out of the parking lot of Rowdy's Tap and pointed himself toward home. He had a daughter to get back to in the morning. He had a life that was small and quiet and his own. And somewhere behind him, under the neon lights of a bar, he probably wouldn't visit again for a while. A nickname that had been thrown like a weapon had just almost imperceptibly, almost accidentally begun its long transformation into something else. The Black Wolf. Not an insult. Not a wound. A name that belonged to the dead and to one living man who carried it for them, whether the world knew it yet or not. The drive home took 23 minutes on a good night, and Daniel made it in 22 without trying. He didn't push the speed. He just drove the way he did everything, with a kind of focused economy. No wasted movement, no wasted thought. The radio was off. The windows were cracked 2 inches enough to let in the cool air without making conversation with the night. He watched the road, and he let his mind do what it needed to do, which was process. He wasn't angry. That was the thing that would have surprised most people who'd witnessed the last hour of his evening. He wasn't angry, and he wasn't shaken, and he wasn't replaying the scene, the way people replay scenes looking for the moment. He could have said something sharper, done something more impressive. He was just finished. The way you're finished with something that needed to happen and now has. What surprised him, if anything surprised him, was the name. Black Wolf. He hadn't heard that name spoken out loud by anyone outside of a VA waiting room in almost 8 years. He hadn't expected to hear it in Rowdy's Tap on a Friday night, thrown like a dart by a man who didn't know the weight of what he was holding. Hearing it had done something to his chest, not pain exactly, but pressure. The specific pressure of a thing you've been carrying for so long, you stop noticing it until someone jostles it. He thought about Martinez again, the way he always did when the name surfaced. Specifically, he thought about the way Martinez had laughed full body, like it was costing him something, like it was worth it. He thought about the morning 2 days before the operation, when Martinez had shown him a photo of his wife, taken at the hospital, holding a baby boy, whose face was still the raw, startled face of the just born. "That's my son," Martinez had said, with a pride so large it seemed barely contained by a human body. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. I'm going to teach that kid everything. "You will," Daniel had said. And he had meant it. He had believed it completely. He pulled into his neighborhood just before 11, the quiet streets of a suburb that had been a cornfield 10 years ago, and parked in the driveway of a house that was too big for 2 people and exactly right for 1 man and 1 12-year-old girl who took up more space than her size would suggest. He sat in the driveway for a while. He looked at his hands on the steering wheel. Old hands, working hands. The right one had a scar that ran from the base of the thumb to the first knuckle, a souvenir from Kunar that he'd explained to Sophie when she'd asked about it at age 6 as a kitchen accident. She hadn't believed him even then. She had his eyes, and his eyes didn't miss much. He got out of the truck and went inside and drank a glass of water standing at the kitchen sink, looking out the window at the backyard where Sophie's bicycle was leaning against the fence at the same careless angle it had occupied for the last 3 weeks. He kept meaning to put it in the garage. He hadn't. He went to bed. He slept the way he always slept, quickly, completely, and without drama. Whatever else the years had taken from him, they hadn't taken that. A man who has spent nights in a hide site in 30-degree mountain cold with his body pressed into rock learns to sleep in whatever window the world gives him. He was asleep by 11:15. He did not dream about Jake Harris. He dreamed about his daughter, which was not unusual, and about a baseball field in spring, which was not unusual either. Simple things. Good things.
Did so?
He woke up at 5:47, 14 minutes before his alarm, because his body still didn't believe in sleeping past dawn. He made coffee. He did 40 minutes of the particular combination of stretching and light movement that his shoulder required every morning. The left one, the one that had been put back together in Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in 2004 by a surgeon named Hessler, who had told him, "You'll have full range of motion if you do the work, and you won't if you don't," and had been completely correct on both counts. He did the work. He had full range of motion. It hurt anyway every morning, but that was the deal, and he'd made his peace with the deal. By 7, he had eaten, showered, and was sitting at the kitchen table with his second cup of coffee and the particular silence of a house that is waiting for a child to come home. His phone buzzed at 7:20. It was a number he didn't recognize, a Tennessee area code, but not one of his contacts. He almost let it go to voicemail. Something made him answer. "Yeah," he said. There was a pause. Then a voice, young male, a little uncertain. Is this Daniel Mercer?" "Who's asking?" Another pause. "My name is Reeves, Connor Reeves. I was at Rowdy's last night. I was with Jake Harris." Daniel set down his coffee cup. "I got your number from Russell," Reeves said quickly. "The bartender. I hope that's—" "I asked him, he said he's known you a while, and I told him why I was calling and he gave it to me. If that's a problem, I'm sorry, I just—" He stopped, steadied himself. "I needed to call you." "Why?" Daniel said. "Because I was there," Reeves said. "And I didn't stop it. I tried once at the beginning and Jake waved me off and I sat back down, and I've been up since 3 this morning thinking about that." A beat. "I'm 29 years old and I sat there and watched a man who held a ridge line alone for 6 hours get mocked in a bar, and I didn't do a damn thing about it. I can't let that sit." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "How'd you know about Kunar?" he said. "I looked you up," Reeves said. "After you left. I found the after-action citations, the ones that are public record. I found the Navy Cross recommendation. I found—" He stopped again. "I found the names: Kowalski, Reyes, Tran, Henderson, Martinez." He said each name carefully, like he was handling something fragile. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm genuinely sorry." "Stop calling me sir," Daniel said. "I've been out a long time." "Yes, it's okay." Another pause. I don't know what I'm asking for. I don't know what I thought calling you would do. I think I just needed you to know that not everyone in that room was—" He struggled with the word. "Not everyone was okay with what happened." Daniel looked out the kitchen window at the backyard, at the bicycle leaning against the fence. "I know that," he said. "I could see it." "Jake's not a bad guy," Reeves said, and Daniel could hear the conflict in it, the loyalty and the shame wrestling each other. He is when he drinks too much and gets, I don't know. He gets into this thing where he has to be the biggest person in the room. I've seen it before. But he's not. He's not cruel, usually. Not like that. "Everybody's got a version of that thing," Daniel said. "The need to be the biggest. Most people grow out of it." "Did you—" It was a genuine question. No challenge in it. Daniel almost smiled. "Eventually," he said. "It takes what it takes." There was a silence that was for the first time in the conversation comfortable. The kind that means two people have found the same frequency. "Can I ask you something?" Reeves said. "Go ahead." "The things you said about that operation, about the men you lost." He paused, choosing his words carefully. Was it hard to say that in front of all those people? Daniel thought about the question. He gave it the consideration it deserved. No, he said finally. It wasn't hard to say. Those men deserve to be said. The hard part is the afterward, the quiet, when everybody goes home and you're still carrying it. He paused. But saying their names out loud, no. That's the least I can do. Reeves was quiet for a long moment. I'm going to remember that, he said. I'm going to remember that for a long time. Good, Daniel said. Now go get some sleep. And the next time somebody's getting backed into a corner in front of you, don't wait for the second round. He heard Reeves exhale. No, sir. A beat. Daniel. Sorry. Reeves. Yeah. You called. That means something. He ended the call and sat with it for a while, the phone face down on the table, the coffee going cool in the mug. Outside, a mockingbird was doing its inventory of every bird call it had ever heard, cycling through them with manic thoroughness. Daniel listened to it without deciding to. He was thinking about Jake Harris. Not about what Jake had said, not about the performance of it, the audience, the name thrown like a weapon. He was thinking with the detached clarity that sometimes comes after sleep about why Jake Harris had done it. About the specific shape of that kind of aggression, the need to diminish to establish to be the hardest thing in the room. He'd seen it in men who were genuinely dangerous, and men who were genuinely frightened, and more often than people understood, those were the same man. Jake Harris, who had done 3 deployments and come home and found that the thing he was best at, the most elite version of himself, had a hard expiration date. Daniel had been there. He remembered the particular vertigo of it the moment you come back from somewhere that tested every limit you had, where you were operating at absolute peak capacity, and you walk into a grocery store and you're supposed to decide between brands of cereal. He remembered feeling like a large animal in a small cage. He remembered the anger that didn't have an address. He'd found his address eventually. She was 12 years old and currently at Aunt Carol's house in Nashville, and her name was Sophie, and she had given him more reasons to stay in the world than any mission ever had. Jake Harris, it seemed, was still looking. Daniel picked up his phone again, looked at it for a long moment. Then he put it back down and stood up and washed his coffee mug and dried it and set it on the counter. He wasn't Jake Harris's answer. That wasn't his job. Every man had to find his own way out of that cage, and nobody could do it for him. But he thought about Reeves, 29 years old, up since 3 in the morning, carrying something that hadn't even been done to him, and he thought that maybe the room last night hadn't been entirely lost. He picked up Sophie at noon. She was standing in Carol's driveway when he pulled up wearing a sweatshirt 2 sizes too big that he was 90% sure belonged to Carol. Her dark hair pulled back in a messy knot. She was holding the golden retriever by the collar with one hand and a half-eaten granola bar in the other, and she was in the middle of a conversation with Carol that she didn't stop when Daniel pulled up. He got out of the truck and waited. And I told her. Sophie was saying that the whole premise of the assignment was flawed, because you can't write a 5-paragraph essay about something that doesn't have 5 distinct parts, and Mrs. Brennan looked at me like I'd grown a second head. Sophie, Carol said, catching Daniel's eye over Sophie's head with the fond exasperation of a woman who had known Daniel Mercer for 15 years and found his daughter to be his most accurate self-portrait. Sophie turned. Her face when she saw him did the thing it always did, went through approximately 7 emotions in under a second, landing on the particular combination of relief and annoyance that is the exclusive currency of 12-year-olds who love their parents and would never in a million years say so directly. You're early, she said. I'm 2 minutes early. That's early. She released the dog, who immediately pressed its large head against Daniel's knee. He put his hand on it absently. Hi, Rosie, he said. Her full name is Rosemary, Sophie said, and she prefers it. She seems fine with Rosie, She's being polite." Carol was watching this exchange with barely concealed delight. She was Daniel's age or close to it, his ex-wife's younger sister, which was a complicated thing that had somehow over the years simplified itself into something easy. Carol had been there. For the divorce, for the custody arrangement, for Sophie's first day of school, and her appendix scare, and her first broken heart over a boy in 5th grade named Ethan, who had not deserved the drama he inspired. Carol had been there. "How was last night?" she asked Daniel. "Quiet," he said. She raised an eyebrow. She knew him too well to believe it entirely, and well enough to let it go. "She ate 2 dinners, Carol said. "I want that on record." "I was hungry," Sophie said with great dignity. "I'm at a growth stage." "You've been at a growth stage since you were 8. "It's a long stage." Daniel almost smiled. Sophie caught it. She always caught it, and her own mouth twitched just briefly before she reassembled her expression of severe reasonableness. They said their goodbyes to Carol and got in the truck and were 3 blocks down the road before Sophie, who had been performing elaborate casualness, said, "What actually happened last night?" Daniel glanced at her. "What? You said it was quiet. You always say it was quiet, but you've got that..." She waved a hand. "That thing. The thing where you're processing something." He kept his eyes on the road. "When did you get so perceptive?" "Around the same time you stopped trying to lie convincingly," she said. "What happened? Did someone start something with you?" He considered it. Sophie was 12, but she had never been 12 the way other 12-year-olds were 12. She was, as her teachers variously described her, precocious, intense, gifted, and challenging, which were 4 words for the same quality, which was that she took things seriously and expected others to do the same. She could handle truth. She always could. "Someone was making noise at the bar," he said. "Young guy ex-military. Decided I was a good target." Sophie turned to look at him. He could feel it. "And," she said. "And I said what I needed to say, and I left." A pause. "Did you say it right?" she asked. "Or did you go all cold voice about it?" "What's wrong with cold voice?" "Nothing when the building's on fire. In a bar, it probably just scares people." She turned back to face forward. "What did he say to you?" "He called me by an old name," Daniel said. "One I hadn't heard in a while. The Black Wolf thing." He looked at her sharply. She shrugged, not quite meeting his eyes. "I found the citations online 2 years ago. The ones about Kunar. I read them." A beat. "You never talked about it. I didn't want to make you." She paused. "But I read them." The truck was quiet for a long moment. "Sophie," he started. "I'm not asking you to explain it," she said quickly. "I don't need all of it. I just..." She stopped. She was good with words for her age, but she was also 12, and sometimes 12 runs up against the edges of the vocabulary it has available. "I just think you should know that I know. That's all. That I know it happened, and I know what it cost, and I know that's part of why you are the way you are." She looked out the passenger window. "And I think that's okay." He didn't say anything for a while. The road ran on ahead of them, straight and flat and ordinary, the way the best roads are. "You're 12, he said finally. "Almost 13, she said. "Almost 13. Don't change the subject." "I wasn't." "You were." He was. He drove. She sat beside him with her feet up on the dashboard, a habit he'd given up correcting, and the granola bar reduced to a small crinkled wrapper in her fist, and outside the October light was doing the thing it did in Tennessee, in fall, golden and low, and almost unbearably specific, the kind of light that insists on itself. "The man last night," Daniel said after a while. "He was angry, and I don't think he knows what he's angry at." "Were you ever like that?" "After I got back, yeah." He paused. For a while. "What fixed it?" He glanced at her. She was watching him now, direct and unself-conscious, with the clear gray eyes that were his eyes, and he thought about how to tell the truth without making it sentimental, because she had very little patience for sentiment, and he'd always respected that about her. "You did," he said. "Mostly." Sophie looked away first. "That's too much pressure to put on a kid," she said, but her voice was different when she said it. "Probably," he said. "I accept it anyway," she said. He turned into their street. The bicycle was still leaning against the backyard fence, visible over the roofline, as he pulled in the driveway, still at the same careless angle. He looked at it. "I'll put that in the garage today," he said. "Leave it," Sophie said. "I like it there. It means I'm coming back to it." He put the truck in park and sat for a moment. He thought about Martinez and about a valley in Kunar, and about a boy in New Mexico named Daniel who was growing up with a name and an absence and hopefully something else besides. He thought about Reeves up since 3 carrying something that didn't belong to him. He thought about Jake Harris, standing in a bar with his confidence turned to ash, surrounded by an audience that had quietly shifted its allegiance without moving a step. He thought about his daughter, who had read the citations at age 10 and carried the knowledge for 2 years without saying a word, waiting until the right moment. Carrying it carefully, the way he'd taught her without ever meaning to, that you carry the things that matter. "Come on," Sophie said, already opening her door. "I need lunch, and I want to tell you the whole story about Rosemary and the sock." "It's Rosie," he said. "She prefers Rosemary." "You made that up." "Probably," she said, and she was already out of the truck, already moving toward the house, and Daniel Mercer watched her go, 12 years old, and almost 13, long-legged and serious, and completely entirely his, and he felt the thing he always felt in these moments, the thing he had no word for, that lived somewhere between gratitude and grief, and something that contained both, and was larger than either. He got out of the truck. He went inside. And in a bar on the edge of Clarksville, Tennessee, a Friday night was becoming a Saturday morning, and the story of the Black Wolf was already moving in ways that none of the people who'd witnessed it could entirely predict, spreading the way stories spread, when they carry something true in them, outward and outward beyond the room that contained them, into a world that was larger and stranger and more ready to receive them than anyone in Rowdy's Tap had known. The story got out on a Sunday. Daniel didn't know this until Monday morning, when Russell called him from Rowdy's at 8:15, which was unusual, because Russell did not make phone calls before noon if he could help it, and he almost always could help it. "You need to see something," Russell said without preamble, without hello. "Good morning to you too," Daniel said. He was standing at the kitchen counter halfway through his first cup of coffee, watching Sophie eat cereal with the focused indifference of someone who was actually thinking about 17 other things. "I'm serious, Daniel. You need to look at your phone." "I'm looking at it right now. You're on it." "After this, someone filmed it." Daniel went still. "Friday night," Russell said. "The whole thing. One of the couples near your table. The woman had her phone out. I don't know if she was recording something else or what, but she got most of it. The confrontation. What you said, all of it. She posted it Saturday night, and by Sunday morning, it had..." He paused, and Daniel could hear him doing the thing people do when a number is too large to say comfortably. "It's got a lot of views, Daniel. A lot." Daniel looked at Sophie, who had stopped eating cereal, and was now watching him with the precise, unhurried attention of a person who can read a room. "How many?" he said. "Last I checked, about 400,000. But that was an hour ago." Sophie's eyebrows went up. She mouthed something that might have been what, or might have been something less appropriate. He held up one finger, wait, and turned slightly away. "Who posted it?" he said. Woman named Karen Ashby. I know her, she comes in sometimes. She didn't do it to cause trouble. Daniel, she tagged it something like, "This veteran just reminded everyone what real strength looks like." And it just... Russell made a sound that was half laugh, half disbelief. It just went. The algorithm got it or whatever. It's everywhere. Daniel pressed his thumb and forefinger into the bridge of his nose. He stood like that for a moment, eyes closed, doing the particular internal accounting that had to happen when a situation changed shape without your permission. "Is it?" he started. "It's good," Russell said quickly. "I mean, they're responding to it right, Daniel. Nobody's laughing at you. If anything, it's..." He paused again. "Jake's getting some heat. People in the comments have been identifying him. It's getting intense." "That's not good either," Daniel said. "I know. That's also why I called." After he hung up, he found the video in under 2 minutes. It wasn't hard. A search of his own name pulled it up immediately, which was a specific kind of strange, seeing your name return results. The way famous names return results, seeing strangers talking about you in the present tense. The video was 2 minutes and 43 seconds. The angle was slightly off-shot from below and to the left, and the audio was imperfect bar noise bleeding in around the edges, a moment where someone laughed and covered a sentence. But you could hear what mattered. You could see what mattered. He watched it once. He watched himself stand up. He watched himself take that one step. He watched his own face, and this was the strangest part, watching his own face settle into the expression he hadn't been fully conscious of making. Calm. Absolute. The face of a man who has already been through the worst version of this moment and is no longer afraid of it. He watched himself say the names. He put the phone down. "Dad," Sophie said. "Yeah." "Are you okay?" He looked at her. She had pushed the cereal bowl aside and was giving him her full attention, which with Sophie was a substantial thing, concentrated, unblinking, entirely serious. "I'm fine," he said. "Something went public that I didn't expect to go public. The bar thing. Someone filmed it." Sophie absorbed this. She reached across the table and picked up his phone before he could object, found the video with the same 2-minute efficiency she applied to everything digital, and watched it. He watched her watch it. Her face went through several things he couldn't quite read. Not unusual. She was getting harder to read as she got older, which was appropriate, and also quietly devastating, and when it was done, she set the phone back down on the table and looked at him. "You said their names," she said. "Yeah." "Martinez and Kowalski and..." "Yeah." She nodded slowly, processing. "How does that feel, that it's out there?" He thought about the honest answer. "Complicated," he said. "Those names belong to those men. They don't belong to the internet." "But people are hearing them," Sophie said. "People who never would have heard them." He didn't have an answer for that. He wasn't sure there was one, or rather he suspected the answer was somewhere between what he felt and what she'd just said, in that uncomfortable space where two true things occupy the same territory. He refilled his coffee. He sat back down. He looked at his daughter across the kitchen table in the October morning light, and he said, "I need you to understand that this might get strange for a while. There might be attention. On me, on the story. I don't want that to touch you." "It's already touched me," Sophie said simply. "I'm in it. I've always been in it." "Sophie." "I'm not complaining," she said. "I'm just stating facts. You can't protect me from being your kid, Dad. That ship sailed a long time ago." She pulled the cereal bowl back. "Can I be honest about something?" "You're always honest about something. I've never successfully stopped you." "I think it's good," she said, "that people are hearing it. Not for the views or whatever, but because Martinez had a son, and that son is 8, 9 years old, and someday he's going to look his dad up, and now there's something to find. Something true." She held his eyes. "That's not nothing, Dad." He sat with that. He sat with it long enough that Sophie finished her cereal, put the bowl in the sink, and grabbed her backpack for school Monday morning, the ordinary machinery of the week reasserting itself, and paused at the kitchen doorway. Also, she said, 400,000 people watched you be decent. In a year where that is not always easy to find, I think that matters. She left for school. He sat at the table alone, and he thought about the son of Martinez, who would be 9 years old, who lived in New Mexico with his mother, who was growing up with the particular compound weight of a hero father he never knew, and a name he'd been given deliberately. He thought about that boy searching his father's name someday and finding the video, finding the words, hearing his father's name spoken in public by the man his father had named him after. He picked up his phone and found a different contact. One he hadn't called in almost 2 years. He stared at it for a long time before pressing call. It rang 4 times. Then, Daniel. The voice was a woman's mid-30s, slightly husky, with the flat vowels of someone originally from the Midwest who had spent a long time in the Southwest. Elena Martinez, Carlos's wife, widow. Elena, he said, I'm sorry to call out of nowhere. I wasn't sure if you'd... I saw the video, she said. Little Danny showed it to me last night. Someone sent it to him, one of Carlos's old friends from the team, I think. A pause. He watched it 3 times. Daniel's jaw tightened. Elena, I want to be clear. I didn't know anyone was filming. I never would have... Daniel. Her voice was gentle. Stop. Please. A beat of silence, the kind that's full rather than empty. He heard his dad's name. He heard someone say his dad's name in front of all those people and mean it. Do you know how rare that is? How many times since Carlos died has a stranger said his name and meant it? She paused. Once, tonight, on a phone screen in my kitchen. My son sat next to me and watched a man he's heard stories about his whole life say his father's name like it was worth saying. She stopped again. That's not a bad thing, Daniel. That's not something you need to apologize for. He pressed the heel of his hand against his eye for a moment. How is he? He said. Little Danny. He's Big Danny now, Elena said, and he could hear the smile in it, bittersweet and real. He's 9, and he's already arguing with his teachers, which Carlos would have found absolutely hilarious. He's got Carlos's hands, big palms, short fingers. I look at them sometimes and I have to... She stopped. Anyway, he's good. He's really good. And you? Getting there, she said. Getting there. A pause. Daniel, he wants to talk to you. Someday, not now, not on the phone, he's 9. But someday, he wants to meet you in person. I told him I'd ask. Daniel looked at the kitchen table, at the place where his coffee mug sat, leaving a ring on the wood that he kept meaning to clean and kept not cleaning. Yes, he said. Whenever he's ready, I'll be there. After the call, he sat motionless for several minutes. Then he stood up, washed both coffee mugs, dried them, put them away. He put on his jacket. He had a job to get to. He worked 3 days a week as a logistics consultant for a small defense contracting firm in town, quiet work that used about 1/3 of his actual capabilities and suited him precisely because of that. But before he left, he stood in the front hallway for a moment, looking at the framed photo on the wall. It was the only military photo he kept anywhere visible. 6 men in full kit, desert background, the flat, squinting brightness of a Middle Eastern afternoon. He was second from the left, looking younger than he ever remembered feeling. Martinez was on his right, laughing at something just outside the frame, caught in the middle of it, genuine and unposed. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he put his hand against the frame just briefly, just for a second, and went out the door. The day was ordinary, in the way Mondays are ordinary, and he moved through it with the efficiency of long practice. The office, the logistics reports a conference call about supply chain timelines that had nothing whatsoever to do with valleys in Kunar Province. He answered emails, He ate a sandwich at his desk. He did not check the video's view count, which was a small act of discipline that cost him more than he expected. At 2:15, his phone buzzed with an unknown number again. He almost ignored it. He answered it. Mr. Mercer. A different voice this time, male, older professional. My name is David Cho. I'm a writer at the Clarksville Leaf Chronicle. I'm working on a story about the video, and I was hoping— No, Daniel said. I understand your hesitation, but— I'm not hesitant, Daniel said. I'm decided. Thank you for calling. He ended the call. The phone buzzed again at 2:40. A different number. Another journalist, this one from Nashville. He ended that call in under 20 seconds. At 3:30, Reeves called. You've seen the video, Reeves said. It wasn't a question. I've seen it. I want you to know I had nothing to do with it going public. Karen Ashby. She's a regular, she just— I know, Daniel said. Russell explained it. Jake saw it, Reeves said. Daniel waited. He's been— Reeves paused. The conflict was back in his voice, the loyalty and shame combination Daniel had heard on Saturday morning. He's getting destroyed in the comments. People have found his social media, his business. He's got a personal training gym and people are leaving reviews calling his phone. It's bad. That's not what I wanted, Daniel said. I know, but— Reeves. Daniel kept his voice level. Whatever Jake Harris has to face because of that video that's between him and what he did, I'm not going to defend him and I'm not going to pile on. That's all I have to say about it. A pause. He asked me for your number, Reeves said. Jake did. I didn't give it to him. I wanted to tell you that I didn't give it to him, but I thought you should know he asked. Thank you, Daniel said, for not giving it. He seemed— Reeves searched for the word. Genuinely shaken. Like he actually sat with the names. Kowalski, Reyes, all of them. Like it finally landed. Daniel looked out his office window at the parking lot. At the ordinary daylight of a Monday afternoon. Good, he said. Payne's a teacher. That's what it's for. He got home before Sophie. She had an after-school thing on Mondays, some kind of debate club that she refused to call a debate club, because in her words, debate club sounds like something people do in 1987, even though it was exactly that, and he made dinner. Nothing complicated. Chicken rice. Something green. The reliable arithmetic of a meal that requires thought and produces warmth. Sophie came in at 5:47, dropped her backpack in the hallway with the same reliability with which she left the bicycle against the fence, and followed the smell of food into the kitchen. How was your day? She said. Journalist called, he said. I said no. Good call, she said. She lifted the lid on the pot and looked at the rice. Anything else? I talked to Elena Martinez, he said. Sophie put the lid back carefully. She turned around. How is she? Good. Getting there, she said. He kept his eyes on the chicken in the pan. Little Danny Martinez, he wants to meet me. When he's older. Sophie was quiet for a moment. What did you say? I said yes. She nodded. She pulled out a chair and sat at the kitchen table in the same seat she'd occupied that morning. In the same seat she'd occupied every morning for 6 years, the comfortable geography of a house that knows itself. Dad, she said. Yeah. I know you don't want the attention. I know you didn't want the video out there, and you don't want the journalists, and you'd rather just, coach Little League and drive the F-150 and pretend you're a normal person. I am a normal person, he said. You held a ridgeline alone for 6 hours, she said. You're interesting, Dad. There's a difference. He turned the chicken. The point is, Sophie said, I think you should let it be what it is. The video, the story, all of it. Not because you owe the world your story, you don't, but because the story is already out. And the part of it that matters, the names, who those men were, what they did, that part deserves to be out. She paused. You can't put it back in the bottle, so you might as well decide how you carry it. He looked at her over his shoulder. When did you get this wise? He said. I've always been this wise, she said. You just weren't paying attention. He turned back to the stove. He adjusted the heat. He thought about a valley in Kunar Province and a morning in October 2004 and 6 men who had gone in together and how many had come out. He thought about the specific weight of surviving the way it doesn't feel like victory, the way it feels like a question you spend the rest of your life trying to answer correctly. He thought about Jake Harris alone in his gym watching the comments roll in, sitting with the names. He thought about a 9-year-old boy in New Mexico with big palms and short fingers and a name that was a debt and a gift. He plated the food. He set it on the table. Sophie had already gotten glasses of water. She did this automatically without being asked. Had done it for years, and they sat down across from each other in the familiar arrangement of their lives, the small, deliberate, ordinary of it. Grace, Sophie said. It was an old joke between them. He wasn't religious. She wasn't religious, but she'd asked it once at age 7, and it had stuck. Be grateful, he said, which was what he always said, the whole of his theology distilled. For what today? She said, which was new. He thought about it. He looked at his daughter at the table, at the food at the kitchen that held them both. For 9-year-old boys who look like their fathers, he said, and for the people who say their fathers' names out loud. Sophie picked up her fork. That's a good one, she said. Outside, the Tennessee evening was moving in the sky, going amber at the edges, the mockingbird done with its inventory, the bicycle leaning against the fence at its patient, permanent angle. The house held its warmth against the cooling air, the way houses do when they are genuinely lived in. Not perfectly, not without wear, but with the accumulated warmth of all the days that had been spent inside them. And somewhere on the internet, 400,000 views was becoming 500,000. And the names were traveling: Martinez and Kowalski and Reyes and Tran and Henderson, outward and outward, into the screens of strangers who hadn't known them, and now at least knew they had existed. That had to be worth something. Daniel Mercer believed it was. The view count crossed 1 million on Tuesday afternoon. Daniel knew this not because he checked. He had made a deliberate decision not to check, the same way he'd made a deliberate decision not to answer journalists. The same way he made most of his decisions, which was quietly and completely, and without much ceremony. He knew it because Sophie texted him at 3:17 from school, which she wasn't supposed to do during class hours, but did with the selective rule-following that was one of her most characteristic traits. The text said, 1 million, just so you know. Also, don't freak out. He was in a meeting about freight logistics when it came in. He read it under the table, put his phone face down, and looked at the whiteboard where someone had drawn a supply chain diagram that now seemed in the particular perspective of the moment, almost cosmically beside the point. He did not freak out. He finished the meeting. He drove home. What he did not anticipate, what no amount of operational planning or calm decision-making had prepared him for, was the letter. It arrived Wednesday. Paper letter, handwritten, forwarded through the bar Russell had apparently become without anyone officially appointing him the unofficial logistics coordinator of Daniel Mercer's sudden and unwanted public existence. Russell called that morning to say a stack of mail had accumulated at Rowdy's addressed variously to the Black Wolf, to the seal from the video, to Daniel M. Clarksville TN, and in one case simply to the decent man. Russell had sorted through them, a task he described as weird and kind of moving honestly, and called to ask what Daniel wanted to do. Throw them away, Daniel said. Daniel. Russell. There's one from a kid in Ohio, Russell said. Handwritten. He says his grandfather was a SEAL in Vietnam, and nobody ever talked about it. And he watched the video with his grandfather, and his grandfather cried, and he wanted you to know. A pause. You want me to throw that one away? Daniel pressed his thumb and forefinger into the bridge of his nose. No, he said. "That's what I thought," Russell said. "I'll keep them behind the bar. You come get them when you're ready." He went on Thursday evening after dropping Sophie at her weekly thing. She had a lot of weekly things. This one involving robotics, which she had gotten into, with a ferocity that Daniel suspected had less to do with robotics and more to do with a boy in the program named Marcus, who she had mentioned 3 times in 2 weeks while pretending not to mention him. He drove to Rowdy's, parked in the lot that still felt slightly different to him than it had a week ago, and went inside. Russell had the stack of letters in a shoebox behind the bar. He put it on the counter without comment, poured Daniel a coffee without being asked, and went back to his work with the discretion of a man who understands when to be invisible. Daniel took the shoebox to his corner table. He sat for a moment looking at it. It was a regular shoebox, New Balance size 11, which struck him as the kind of specific and irrelevant detail you notice when you're stalling. He lifted the lid. There were 31 letters. He read them slowly, the way he did everything. The one from Ohio from the teenager with the Vietnam veteran grandfather was on top, and Russell hadn't exaggerated. The handwriting was careful, slightly irregular. The handwriting of someone who doesn't write by hand much, but chose to for this. The boy's name was Andrew. His grandfather's name was Thomas Keller, formerly of SEAL Team 2, 1968 to 1972, and Andrew wrote that his grandfather had watched the video sitting in his recliner and had not said a word through the whole thing, and then when it ended had said, "That's right, that's exactly right," and then cried, quietly, looking out the window. He doesn't cry. Andrew wrote, "I've never seen him cry, not once. I don't know what you did or exactly how you did it, but you made my grandfather feel like somebody remembered. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you." Daniel read it twice. Then he set it aside and went to the next one. A woman in Georgia whose son had been a Marine killed in Humiliated Province in 2011. She had watched the video, and what she said was not about Daniel at all. It was about her son, about his name, Michael, about how rarely she heard strangers say it with weight behind it. "He deserved weight," she wrote. "They all deserve weight. Thank you for saying theirs like they mattered. They did. They do." A man in Arizona who said he'd been in recon had known 2 men who'd served with Daniel's team in a different rotation and had spent the last 10 years working at a veterans center and trying to explain to funders why it mattered. "I've given 100 speeches about sacrifice and service," he wrote, "and you did more in 3 minutes in a bar than I've managed in a decade. I don't know if that's encouraging or humbling. Maybe both." A retired schoolteacher in Kentucky, a 22-year-old woman in Seattle who said she'd never had any connection to the military but had watched the video 6 times. A pastor in Mississippi, a man who identified himself only as formerly Team 5, now a plumber in Colorado, who wrote 3 sentences. "You said the right thing. You said it the right way." Martinez would have been proud. That one Daniel had to put down for a minute. He looked at the table, at the wood grain, at the coffee mug. He breathed in slowly through his nose, out through his mouth, the old discipline, the reliable anchor. Then he picked the letter back up and kept going. He was on the 24th letter when he heard the door. He didn't look up immediately. The bar was doing its regular Thursday business, people coming and going, and his corner table faced the room, so his peripheral vision handled the door without requiring his full attention. He registered the entry, registered the size and posture of the figure, registered nothing alarming, and went back to the letter. Then the figure didn't move toward the bar. It moved toward his table. He looked up. Jake Harris looked like a different man than the one who had stood in this bar 6 days ago with a beer in his hand and the room in his pocket. He was wearing a plain gray sweatshirt and jeans. No performance in it, no theater. He looked like he hadn't been sleeping. There were things around his eyes that Daniel recognized. Not guilt exactly, because guilt at that stage has already moved somewhere deeper, has stopped being visible in the obvious places, and started being visible in the jaw, in the set of the shoulders, in the particular way a man holds himself when he is carrying something he doesn't know how to put down. Jake stopped at the edge of the table. He didn't sit. He didn't sprawl. He stood there with his hands at his sides, and Daniel noticed that they weren't quite still. "I wasn't going to come," Jake said. "Okay," Daniel said. "Reeves told me not to. Said you'd made it clear you didn't want contact." He paused. "I came anyway. I'll leave if you want me to." Daniel looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded at the chair across from him, the same chair Jake had pulled out without asking 6 days ago. "Sit down," he said. Jake sat, differently than before, contained forward elbows on his knees. He looked at the shoebox of letters on the table and then looked away, like looking at it was impolite. "I've been watching the comments," Jake said. "Don't do that to yourself. People found my gym, my Yelp page, my Instagram. I've lost 4 clients this week." He said it flatly, without self-pity, just inventory. "I'm not telling you that for sympathy. I'm telling you because it's part of what happened, and I'm trying to—" He stopped. "I'm trying to account for it. Fully." Daniel waited. "I looked up the names," Jake said. "All of them. Kowalski, Reyes, Tran, Henderson, Martinez." He said them the same careful way Reeves had said them on the phone Saturday morning, like handling something fragile. "I found the after action. The citations. I read everything public record had." He looked up. "You pulled Henderson out before you held the position. You went back for him with a dislocated shoulder and you pulled him out. And then you went back to the position." Daniel said nothing. "The citation for your Navy Cross," Jake said, "describes you as demonstrating." He paused, remembering it exactly. "Extraordinary heroism, complete disregard for personal safety, and selfless dedication to his teammates in the face of overwhelming hostile fire." He said it like he was reciting something sacred, and felt the weight of the recitation. "I read that and I thought about what I said to you. Washed-up relic, the old days. I thought about standing in this room and using that name like it was a punchline." His jaw tightened. "I don't have a word for what that makes me." "I do," Daniel said. "Young and scared, and not sure what you're worth now that the thing that defined you is behind you." Jake looked at him sharply, not with anger, with something more vulnerable than anger. "That's not—" he started. "Jake." Daniel's voice was even, not unkind. "I've been exactly where you are. Not in this specific situation, but in that specific feeling. The one where you've been the best at the hardest thing, and then the world asks you to be ordinary, and you don't know how. And the only tool you have left is the aggression, so you use it even when there's nothing to fight." He paused. "I know what that looks like from the inside. I recognize it." Jake was quiet for a long time. Russell materialized, briefly set down a water glass near Jake without being asked, and disappeared again with the same invisible efficiency. "My father was Army," Jake said finally. 2 tours in Vietnam. He never talked about it either. He looked at the shoebox again. "He died in 2019, and we never once talked about what he saw, what it cost him." A muscle moved in his jaw. "When you said Martinez's name, and Kowalski's name, all of them, and you said them like they deserved to take up space in the room." He stopped. "I thought about my father, about all the names he never said to anyone, all the men he lost that he just carried alone for 50 years. He pressed his lips together. "And I'm standing there with my beer, having just used one of those names as a weapon." He shook his head. "I don't know how to tell you how that landed." "You just did," Daniel said. Jake looked at him. "You just told me," Daniel said. "That's how." Another silence. Longer. The bar moved around them, the jukebox, the TVs, the particular ambient life of a room full of people who each have their own version of this same conversation happening somewhere inside them, whether they know it or not. "I owe you an apology," Jake said. "That's why I came. Not to explain, not to make you understand why I did it. There's no why that makes it okay. I came to say that it was wrong. What I did was wrong. And I'm sorry." He said it straight. No performance in it, no hedging. Just the words set down plainly, the way you set something down when you're done carrying it. Daniel looked at him. He thought about what an apology costs a man like Jake Harris. Not a man without ego, because there was no such thing, but a man whose ego had been his primary infrastructure for a long time, who had built everything on top of it. He thought about what it takes to walk back into the room where you failed most visibly and face the man you failed against and say the words without qualification. It was not nothing. It was in fact something. "I hear you," Daniel said. Jake nodded. He started to stand. "Sit down," Daniel said. "I'm not finished." Jake sat back down. "Apology accepted," Daniel said. "That part's done? You said it? I heard it. It's done. But I want to say something to you, and I want you to actually listen, because I'm only going to say it once, and I mean it." Jake held his eyes. Steady. "You're good at the hard thing," Daniel said. "I could see it 6 days ago, not just the bravado, not just the noise. Underneath it. The way you held yourself, the way you moved through the room. That's real. That doesn't go away because you got out of the teams." He leaned forward slightly. "The question isn't whether you're still the best at the hardest thing. The question is what the hardest thing is now. And in my experience, the hardest thing, the thing that requires every bit of toughness you ever built, is figuring out how to be a decent man in an ordinary life. Without a mission, without a team, without anyone handing you the objective." He paused. "That's the evolution, not the training standards, not the newer program or the harder selection. This." He gestured between them at the table, at the room, at everything it represented. "Learning how to sit in a bar on a Friday night and not need to be the most dangerous thing in it." Jake was very still. "Your father carried his names alone for 50 years, Daniel said. "You don't have to do that, but you have to choose not to. It doesn't just happen. You have to decide every day that the weight is worth sharing, and that sharing it doesn't make you less." He sat back. "That's the work. It's harder than anything Coronado threw at you. I promise you that." Jake looked at the table. Something was moving behind his eyes. Not tears, not quite, but the near relative of tears, the thing that happens in the body before it decides whether it's going to let that particular gate open. "How do you start?" Jake said. It came out quieter than he intended. "You already did," Daniel said. "You walked back in here. That was the start." Jake looked up. He was different in this moment from every version of himself that had occupied this bar over the last 6 days, different from the man who had swaggered in with his group, different from the man who had thrown the name like a weapon, different from the man in the video that 1 million people had watched. He was younger somehow, more actual, the performance stripped away, and just the person underneath it, which is always the harder and more interesting thing. "Reeves is a good man," Daniel said. "He called me Saturday morning at 7-something because he couldn't sleep. He's 29 years old and he was up all night carrying something that wasn't his fault." He looked at Jake. "You've got good people around you. Let them be good to you." Jake nodded. Once. Slow. He stood up for real this time, with purpose rather than escape. He extended his hand across the table. Daniel looked at it for just a moment. Then he shook it. Firm, brief, the handshake of 2 men who have found an honest footing. "Thank you," Jake said, "for I don't know, for not being who I expected you to be." "Who'd you expect?" Jake almost smiled. "Someone angrier," he said. "I used up all my anger a long time ago," Daniel said. On things that deserved it. Jake Harris walked out of Rowdy's tap. And this time, the room didn't watch him go with the collective attention of an audience tracking a performer. He left the way ordinary people leave, just a man in a gray sweatshirt heading out into a Wednesday night, carrying slightly less than he'd carried in. Daniel sat with the shoebox for another hour. He read the remaining 7 letters. One of them was from a woman named Patricia Heller, whose husband Gerald had served with SEAL Team 4 in the 80s and had passed away 18 months ago. She wrote that she had watched the video at her kitchen table alone and had felt for the first time in a long time that someone was honoring what Gerald had been, not his rank, not his medals, but the specific human weight of what he'd given. She wrote, "He was not a symbol. He was a man. And you spoke about your men the same way as men, not symbols, not categories, men." She wrote, "My husband would have liked you very much." Daniel folded that letter carefully and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket. He wasn't sure why. He didn't examine the impulse too closely. Some things don't require examination. He put the rest of the letters back in the shoebox. He put the lid on. He picked it up and took it to the bar where Russell was cleaning glasses with the eternal patience of a man who has cleaned a lot of glasses. "Keep this somewhere safe," Daniel said, setting the shoebox on the counter. Russell looked at it. "For how long?" "I don't know yet," Daniel said. "I'll figure out what to do with them." Russell nodded. He took the shoebox without comment, put it on the shelf below the bar, with the careful deliberateness of someone handling something that doesn't have an obvious category, but clearly has value. "Jake came in," Russell said. "It wasn't a question." "He did." "How'd that go?" Daniel pulled his jacket on. "Better than it could have," he said. "Better than he expected, I think." Russell looked at him with the expression of a man who has tended bar long enough to recognize the shape of a moment that's going to sit with him. "You're a strange guy, Daniel," he said. "I mean that as a compliment." "I know you do," Daniel said. He drove to pick up Sophie from robotics. She was outside when he pulled up in the middle of an animated conversation with a boy who was, even at this distance, obviously Marcus Tall, slightly awkward with the eager-to-please energy of a kid who is trying hard and knows it. Sophie was laughing at something he'd said, the real laugh, the one that surprised her, the one that was completely unguarded. Daniel watched this for a moment through the windshield. He thought about what it costs and what it gives the whole long project of caring about people, of letting them matter, of saying their names out loud, like they're worth the air. He thought about his daughter laughing with a boy named Marcus. He thought about a 9-year-old in New Mexico with his father's hands. He thought about Jake Harris in a gray sweatshirt carrying slightly less. He thought about Thomas Keller in his recliner in Ohio, watching a video of a man he'd never met saying, "That's right, that's exactly right." And then, for the first time in a very long time, looking out the window and crying. Sophie spotted the truck. She said something quick to Marcus, who nodded and waved in Daniel's general direction, with the earnest territorial terror of a boy waving at the father of a girl he likes. Daniel gave him a single nod. Sophie jogged to the truck and got in, bringing cold air and the residual energy of a good evening. "How was robotics?" he said. "Productive," she said in the carefully neutral tone of someone who is not going to discuss Marcus unprompted. "Good," he said, in the carefully neutral tone of someone who is not going to ask about Marcus unprompted. They pulled out of the parking lot. "How was your evening?" she said. He thought about the shoebox, about the letters, about Jake Harris's handshake, and the woman named Patricia Heller and her husband Gerald, who had been a man, not a symbol, and who would apparently have liked Daniel very much. "Good," he said. "Really good, actually." Sophie looked at him sideways. She registered something in his voice. She always registered something she had. His eyes, and she nodded slowly, accepting it, filing it away for later. "The view count is at 1.2 million, she said. I don't need to know that, he said. I know, she said. I'm telling you anyway. She looked out the window. Martinez's name has been said 1.2 million times this week, just so you have that number. He kept his eyes on the road. He drove home through the Tennessee night, and the names rode with him the way they always did. Martinez and Kowalski and Reyes and Tran and Henderson, not as weight exactly, or not only as weight, but as something else too. Something that was beginning slowly and imperfectly, and against all his instincts toward privacy and quiet, to feel like purpose. 3 weeks after the night at Rowdy's Tap, Daniel Mercer got a phone call that he had not been expecting and could not have planned for, from a number with a New Mexico area code that he recognized immediately. It was not Elena Martinez. It was a 9-year-old boy with his father's hands who had apparently decided on a Tuesday afternoon after school that he was done waiting. "Hi," the boy said. "Is this Daniel?" Daniel was in the backyard fixing the latch on the gate that had been giving him trouble for 2 months. He had a screwdriver in one hand and his phone pressed between his ear and his shoulder, and when he heard that voice, high, clear, slightly formal in the way of children who have rehearsed something, he stopped moving entirely. "This is Daniel," he said. "This is Danny Martinez," the boy said. "Carlos Martinez was my dad. My mom said you talked to her. She said I had to wait, but I—" A pause, and in the pause, Daniel could hear the specific texture of a 9-year-old negotiating between the instruction he'd been given and the thing he needed. "I didn't want to wait anymore. Is that okay?" Daniel sat down on the back step. He set the screwdriver on the concrete beside him carefully the way you set things down when your hands need to be empty. "That's okay," he said. "I'm glad you called." "I watched the video," Danny said. "A lot of times. My mom doesn't know how many times because I watched it after she went to bed." He said this with the matter-of-fact confession of a child who has not yet learned to be embarrassed by honesty. "You said my dad's name." "I did," Daniel said. "You said it like—" Danny stopped searching. "Like it was important. Like it was the most important name in the room." Daniel pressed his free hand flat against his knee. He looked at the backyard, the gate with its broken latch, the bicycle still against the fence, the ordinary geography of a life that had somehow become the container for things much larger than its dimensions suggested. "It was," Daniel said. "It is." A silence. Then, "My mom told me you were with him. When he at the end of the deployment. She said you were the last person who saw him before." The boy's voice was steady, holding something carefully the way children hold things they know are fragile. "What was he like when you knew him?" Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. He thought about how to answer that question honestly, not the citation version, not the polished memory that gets told at memorials, but the actual Carlos Martinez, the man who laughed too loud, who always had an opinion about the best way to do any given task and was usually right, but never graceful about it, who had a habit of humming while he cleaned his gear. Always the same fragment of the same song, something old in Spanish that he said his grandmother had taught him and that he could never remember the full words to. "Hut." He was funny, Daniel said, like genuinely funny, not trying to be funny. The kind of person who could make you laugh when nothing was funny. On the worst days when everything was hard and cold and exhausting, he'd find the one absurd thing about the situation and name it, and somehow that made the whole thing survivable. He paused. He was also stubborn as hell. Excuse the language. "I've heard worse," Danny said with a seriousness that made Daniel want to smile. "He was the best man in a bad situation I've ever known," Daniel said. "When things went wrong, and they did, things always go wrong, he never looked for someone to blame. He just looked for the next thing to do. That's rarer than people think." Danny was quiet, absorbing. Daniel could almost feel the weight of it moving through the phone line. This boy, 9 years old, sitting somewhere in New Mexico in the afternoon light, receiving the specific kind of nourishment that only comes from someone who actually knew. "He named me after you," Danny said. "I know." "Why?" Daniel thought about the morning 2 days before the operation. The photo of the just-born baby, the pride too large to be contained. He thought about Martinez saying, "I'm gonna teach that kid everything," the absolute certainty of it, the undefeated belief in a future that was going to happen, that had to happen, that a man who laughed like that and hummed his grandmother's song simply could not be prevented from inhabiting. "Because he trusted me," Daniel said, "and I think because he wanted you to have a name that meant something, something specific. Not just a good sound, but a reference. A man he could point to and say, that's who I want you to look at when you're figuring out how to be." He paused. "I don't know if I'm worth that, but I know that's why he did it." Another silence. Longer. "I'm going to be a Navy SEAL," Danny said. Flat certain the way 9-year-olds say things that adults have learned to say with more hedging. "Yeah," Daniel said. "Yeah, I've already started running. My mom times me." A pause. "I'm pretty fast." "Your dad was fast," Daniel said. "Was he faster than you?" "On a good day." "What about a bad day?" "On a bad day." Daniel said, "We weren't running, so it didn't matter." He heard Danny process this, a small sound, something between a laugh and a huh. The sound of a 9-year-old encountering the reality behind the stories and finding it both more complicated and somehow more satisfying than the simplified version. "I want to meet you," Danny said. "In person," my mom said. "I know what your mom said," Daniel said. "And whenever you're both ready, I'll be there." That's not a maybe, that's a promise. "Okay," Danny said. The word was simple and complete, the word of someone who has gotten what they came for and knows it. They talked for 11 more minutes. Danny told him about school, about running times, about a teacher named Mr. Okafor, who was his favorite, because he explains things like you're actually smart enough to understand them, which most teachers don't. Daniel listened, the way he listened to Sophie, with full attention, without the half-presence of a person waiting for their turn to speak. He asked questions. Real questions. Danny answered them with the forthcoming directness of a child who has been raised by a woman who valued honesty, and a father's legend who made it look like strength. When they hung up, Daniel sat on the back step for a long time. He was not crying. He had moved through the stages of grief for Carlos Martinez over a span of years that had slowly, imperfectly transformed the acute into something chronic, and then into something livable. Not gone, never gone, but distributed more evenly through the tissue of daily life, until it became less an injury and more a characteristic. But sitting on the back step with the phone in his hand and the cool November air against his face, he felt something release in him that he hadn't fully known was held. Martinez's son was fast. Martinez's son wanted to be a SEAL. Martinez's son had watched the video an uncounted number of times after his mother went to sleep alone in the dark, and listened to his father's name being spoken by the man his father had named him for. "That's right," Thomas Keller had said in his recliner in Ohio. "That's exactly right." It was. It was exactly right. Daniel picked up the screwdriver. He fixed the gate latch. He went inside and started dinner. View count, which he still refused to check directly, had passed 2 million by the end of that week. He knew this because Sophie told him. And Sophie told him because she had apparently decided that her role in this situation was to be his intelligence officer, whether he wanted one or not. What he had not anticipated, what managed to surprise him, even through the accumulated surprises of the past 3 weeks, was the call from the VA. Dr. Patricia Wren was the director of a veterans outreach program attached to the Tennessee Valley VA healthcare system, and she called on a Friday morning with the particular efficiency of a person who respects other people's time because she has none to waste. "I'll be direct," she said. We work with veterans who are struggling with reintegration, men and women who are out of the service and having a hard time finding solid ground. We do group work, individual counseling, community programs. We have a good team and a real funding problem and a significant need for what I'll call authentic voices. She paused. I watched your video. My entire staff watched your video. And I've spent the last 2 weeks trying to figure out how to make this call without it sounding like I'm trying to commodify your trauma, because that's not what I'm doing. Daniel was, for the first time in recent memory, mildly surprised. What are you doing? He said. I'm asking if you'd be willing to come talk to some people who need to hear from someone who's been where they are and found the other side of it, she said. Not a speech, not a motivation seminar, just a conversation. With men who are where you were at 5 or 10 or 15 years ago. Men who are angry and directionless and using the last tool in their kit, which is aggression, because nobody has shown them what comes next. Daniel stood at his kitchen window looking at the backyard. The gate fixed. The bicycle still against the fence, still waiting. How many people? He said. First session. Maybe 12. Probably less. These are guys who don't come easy, Mr. Mercer. They don't walk through doors willingly. They need a reason. I'm not a counselor, he said. I know, she said. That's partly why I'm calling you. He thought about Jake Harris sitting at the corner table in a gray sweatshirt asking, how do you start in a voice quieter than he'd intended? He thought about Reeves up since 3 a.m. carrying something that hadn't even been done to him because he had a conscience and didn't know what to do with it. He thought about the 31 letters in the shoebox behind Russell's bar and the one from Patricia Heller that he still carried in his jacket. He thought about what Sophie had said, you can't put it back in the bottle, so you might as well decide how you carry it. When, he said. Dr. Wren did not quite manage to conceal her relief. I was thinking 2 weeks. Give me time to prepare the group. Give you time to decide what you want to say. I won't know what I want to say until I'm in the room, he said. That's fine, she said. That might be better. He told Sophie that evening. She was doing homework at the kitchen table, actually doing it, which meant the assignment was interesting, because when it wasn't interesting, she did it in approximately 11 minutes, and then spent the remaining time doing something else. She looked up when he started talking, and she listened with the full attention focus that was without question the trait of his that she had inherited most completely. When he finished, she looked at him for a moment. Are you nervous? She said. A little, he said, which was honest. Good, she said. That means it matters. She looked back at her homework. Don't prepare a speech. Just talk to them the way you talk to Jake. You weren't there when I talked to Jake. I know how you talk, she said. Same way you talk to me, like I'm capable of handling the truth. She underlined something on her paper. Most people aren't talked to that way. It's why it works. Manu. He stood in the kitchen for a moment looking at his daughter, 12 years old and almost 13, doing her homework at the table where they had eaten breakfast the morning after everything changed in the house that was too big for 2 people and exactly right for them. He thought about the version of himself that had existed before Sophie, when he had come back from Kunar with his shoulder repaired and his team reduced by 5, and the particular hollowness of a man who has survived what others didn't and hasn't yet found the shape of the life that's supposed to follow. He thought about the night his daughter was born, the phone call from his ex-wife, the hospital, the moment the nurse had put this small, furious, red-faced creature in his arms, and she had looked at him with the unfocused intensity of the just born. And he had thought with a clarity that cut through every other noise. This is the mission now. This is the only mission that matters. He had not been wrong. Sophie, he said. She said, still writing. I'm proud of you, he said. She stopped writing. She looked up. This was not a thing he said rarely. He said it when he meant it, which was often, but something in the way he said it now made her actually receive it, made her put down her pencil and look at him, without the protective layer of 12-year-old deflection. I know, she said. Good, he said. I want to make sure you know. She held his eyes for a moment, the gray eyes that were his eyes, and then she nodded once with the particular seriousness that was her version of acceptance, and picked her pencil back up. He went to bed that night without difficulty. He slept completely. He did not dream about Kunar Province or about anything hard. He dreamed about a baseball field in spring, which was the dream he always had when something had settled correctly. The VA session was on a Thursday morning, 2 weeks later. The room was a conference room in the outreach center plain, functional 12 chairs arranged in a rough circle, a coffee machine that sounded like it had been through combat of its own. Dr. Wren was there, quiet and prepared. There were 11 men in the chairs when Daniel arrived, and he recognized the specific composition of the room immediately. Not because he knew these men, but because he knew this kind of men. He had been this kind of man. The held posture, the watchful eyes, the careful distance each person maintained from the others, like proximity, was a vulnerability. He sat down, not at the front of the room, in the circle like everyone else. Dr. Wren started it briefly. Names, context, ground rules, and then she said, "Daniel, would you like to say something?" And then, because she was good at her job, she stepped back and let the room be the room. Daniel looked around the circle. He looked at each face, one at a time without hurry. Some of them held his gaze. Some looked at the floor. One man, maybe 35, Marine Corps tattoo visible below his left sleeve. The set of his jaw suggesting he had not entirely decided to be here, stared at the wall with the systematic disengagement of someone who has perfected the appearance of absence. "I'm not going to tell you my story," Daniel said. Several faces showed the specific micro-expression of people whose expectations have been lightly disrupted. "I'm going to tell you something that happened to me about a month ago in a bar," he said, "and then I'd like to hear from you." He told them about Rowdy's Tap. Not the version that was on the internet, he told them the inside of it. What it felt like to hear that name thrown like a weapon. What it felt like to stand up and not know in that exact moment whether what was going to come out of his mouth was going to be the right thing or the wrong thing, and to stand up anyway. He told them about calling Elena Martinez from his kitchen the next morning. He told them about a 9-year-old boy who had watched the video in the dark after his mother went to sleep. He told them about Jake Harris coming back. When he got to that part, the man with the Marine Corps tattoo, the one staring at the wall, turned his head. "He came back," the man said. "He came back," Daniel said. The man said nothing, but he was no longer staring at the wall. "I'm not telling you this because I handled it perfectly," Daniel said. "I'm telling you this because I didn't entirely. I thought about walking away all night. I thought about ignoring it. And what came out of it, the video, the letters, all of it, I didn't want any of that. I didn't design it. It happened because I said some names out loud in a bar, and those names were true, and true things travel." He looked around the circle. "You've all got names you're carrying. Men you lost, or versions of yourself you lost, or things you did or didn't do that you replay. And you're carrying them alone, because that's what we were trained to do. Carry it, don't show it, keep moving." He paused. "I'm not here to tell you that's wrong. I'm here to tell you that it has a cost, and that the cost compounds." A man across the circle, older, maybe 50, with the worn look of someone who has been compounding interest on his silence for a long time, put his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor. "My son doesn't know why I am the way I am," he said. Not to Daniel, not to anyone in particular, just into the space. He thinks I just don't want to be around. Doesn't know that being in a room with him sometimes feels like everything I lost is standing right there looking at me. He stopped. The room was entirely still. "I don't know how to explain that without—" He shook his head. "Without it sounding like I'm blaming him, which I'm not. He didn't do anything." "No," Daniel said. "He didn't." The man looked up. Your son needs you to say that to him, Daniel said. Not the whole story, not all at once, but what you just said in this room, that it's not him, he needs to hear that directly, from you. He held the man's eyes. That's not weakness. That's the hardest kind of strength there is. The room opened after that. It didn't open all the way. These were not men who gave up their held positions easily, and Daniel respected that because he was not asking them to. But it opened enough. One man talked about his sister, who was the only one in his family who called him regularly, and whom he answered approximately 1 call in 4 because he couldn't explain why he let it ring. Another talked about the gym, which was the only place he felt competent anymore, and how that scared him because gyms close and bodies age, and then what? The Marine with the tattoo, his name was Travis. Daniel learned said almost nothing, but by the end of the session, he was leaning forward instead of away, and when Daniel caught his eye across the circle, he didn't look at the wall. Sure. Dr. Wren ended it at the 1-hour mark with the practiced efficiency of someone who knows that rooms like this have a fragile shelf life. She thanked everyone. People stood stretched, did the minimal social maintenance of men who are not ready to be emotional in public, but have just been a little bit, and are managing the aftermath. Travis stopped Daniel at the door. "The guy in the bar," he said. "Jake?" "Yeah," Daniel said. He actually came back and apologized. He did. Travis looked at him for a moment. He was working through something the same way Jake had worked through something in the bar, the calculation of a man who is deciding whether the door in front of him is worth what it costs to open. "I've got someone I owe that to," Travis said. "I've been—" He stopped. "A long time." "Then maybe it's time," Daniel said. Travis nodded. Once. The nod of someone who has decided something and is not going to undecide it. "Same time next month," he said. "I'll be here," Daniel said. "May." He drove home through the November afternoon, the trees bare now, the sky the specific flat gray of Middle Tennessee in late fall, the kind of sky that isn't oppressive but isn't generous either, just honest about what season it is. He felt wrung out in the good way, the way you feel after physical work, that used the right muscles. He felt also, and this was newer, stranger, useful. In a way that was different from the logistics consulting, different from Little League, different from the accumulated ordinary usefulness of being a present parent, useful in a way that required the specific shape of his particular damage. He picked up Sophie from school. She got in the truck and read his face the way she always read his face. "Good," she said. "Really good," he said. She nodded. She asked no further questions. She had learned over years of living with a man who needed to process things in his own time that asking fewer questions got her more answers eventually. It was a patience she had cultivated deliberately, and it was more sophisticated than most adults managed. They drove home. He made dinner. She did homework. The house settled into its familiar rhythms, the comfortable machinery of their evenings, and Daniel moved through it with the particular presence he had been working toward his whole adult life. Not performing presence, not manufacturing it, but actually being inside the moments as they happened fully, without the forward lean of a man, always already somewhere else. After dinner, Sophie looked up from her phone. "The newspaper wants to do a story," she said. "I know," he said. "I've said no." "This one's different," she said. "It's the Leaf Chronicle. Local, small. The reporter, she reached out to me through school, which is slightly invasive, but I forgave her because the email was polite. She said she doesn't want to write about the video. She wants to write about the men, Martinez and the others, the ones who died." She set her phone down. "She said she found their names because of the video, but the story she wants to write isn't about you, it's about them." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "She'd do it with or without you," Sophie said. "But she'd rather have your help getting it right." He looked at his daughter. At the kitchen table, the coffee mugs in the cabinet, the photograph in the hallway, the bicycle against the fence in the dark backyard that he could not see but knew was there. "How'd she reach you?" he said. "She found my school's academic awards list online," Sophie said. "My name was on it," she cross-referenced. She paused. "She's thorough. I think she'd do a good job." He looked at his daughter for a long time. "I'll call her," he said. The article ran on the first Sunday of December in the print edition of the Clarksville Leaf Chronicle and on their website. The reporter's name was Diane Calloway, and she had done the work the way she'd promised, not a story about Daniel Mercer, or not primarily. A story about 5 men named Carlos Martinez, Robert Kowalski, Miguel Reyes, James Tron, and David Henderson. Their hometowns, their families, their reasons for enlisting, the specific human texture of who they had been before and during and in the brief, irreplaceable time that was all they got. Diane had tracked down families. She had talked to Elena and to Kowalski's brother in Pittsburgh and to Henderson's daughter in Atlanta, who was 32 now, and who said something in the article that Daniel had to read twice. "My father died when I was 18, and I spent the next 14 years angry at the war and the military and everything connected to them. Then I watched a video of a man say my father's name in a bar, and I cried for 4 hours. And something in me, something that had been closed for a long time, I felt it open. I don't know what to do with that yet, but I know it's better than it being closed." The article included a photo of the 6 men, the same photo that hung in Daniel's hallway, provided by Elena Martinez, and run with permission. It included Daniel's name once in the final paragraph, not as the subject of the story, but as a reference point, the man who said their names out loud in a bar on a Friday night in November, not for cameras and not for credit, but because they deserve to be said. Sophie read the article online, sitting at the kitchen table on Sunday morning. She read it all the way through without speaking. When she finished, she set her phone face down on the table and looked at the window for a moment. "Diane did a good job," she said. "She did," Daniel said. "Henderson's daughter," Sophie said. "The part about something opening." "Yeah. I think that happens more than people know," she said. "The closing. People walking around with things closed inside them for years because nobody said the right thing at the right time." She looked at him. "Or said the name, just said the actual name." He nodded. Sophie looked at the phone. "I want to write a letter," she said, "to Danny Martinez, the 9-year-old. Not about the article, not about the video. Just," she paused, "just from one kid who grew up with a dad who carries things to another kid who grew up with a dad who would have carried things, if he'd had the chance." She looked at Daniel. "Is that okay?" He looked at his daughter, the gray eyes, his eyes, the seriousness of her, that was also his seriousness, and the warmth underneath it that she had made herself, and that belonged entirely to her. "That's more than okay," he said. She nodded. She picked up her phone and started composing with the focused intensity she brought to everything that mattered to her, and Daniel sat across the table with his coffee and watched the December light come through the kitchen window, and thought about the strange, undesigned shape of the last 6 weeks. A Friday night he hadn't expected anything from, a name thrown like a weapon that had turned in the air and landed as something else entirely. A shoebox of letters. A 9-year-old boy running timed miles in New Mexico. 11 men in a circle of chairs, one of them slowly turning his face away from the wall. Jake Harris in a gray sweatshirt leaving Rowdy's Tap, carrying slightly less than he'd carried in. He thought about Martinez. He thought about the valley. He thought about 6 hours alone on a ridgeline in the cold dark, holding a position. Not because he wasn't afraid, he had been completely afraid, but because there was simply no other acceptable thing to do. He thought about what Martinez had said when they came back for him before the blood loss took him under. "You held like a wolf, man, like a black wolf in the dark." He had not known then what the name would cost him. He had not known what it would mean to carry it through 22 years of ordinary life, through 1 marriage and 1 divorce, through Sophie's birth and her first day of school and her first broken heart and her first robotics competition, where she placed third and argued passionately with the judges that the rubric was flawed. Through the logistics consulting and the Little League coaching and the single dad Fridays at Rowdy's Tap, when he was just a man with nowhere to be. Through a night when a young man with too much to prove threw the name across a bar like a dart, not knowing what it was he was throwing. Memoir. He had not known that the name would travel, that it would go out into the world and carry the other names with it. Martinez, Kowalski, Reyes, Tran Henderson into the phones and the screens and the kitchens of strangers who hadn't known them and would now at least know they had existed. That it would reach a boy in New Mexico and an old man in a recliner in Ohio and a woman in Atlanta who had carried a closed thing for 14 years and felt it finally open. He had not known, but he had held the position. He had said the names. He had done the only acceptable thing. Sophie looked up from her phone. "How do you spell Kowalski?" she said. He spelled it for her. She went back to her letter. He went back to his coffee and the December light and the small, deliberate, fully inhabited life that was his. Outside, the bicycle leaned against the fence, patient and permanent, waiting for the spring. The gate latch held, the house kept its warmth, and the names, all of them, the living and the dead, the men in circles of chairs, and the boys running timed miles, and the daughters who write letters, and the fathers who carry things, and the wolves who hold the dark, all of them traveled outward and outward and outward, carried by something that could not be uploaded or shared or viewed or counted. Something older than the internet. Something that had been moving since the first man said another man's name out loud and meant it. The truth plain and specific that some things cost everything and are worth it anyway. Daniel Mercer drank his coffee. He was home.